Hello everyone, I am Asimina Vergu, Head of Education for BGCI, and I would like to welcome you all to the second Communities in Nature webinar. The aim of the series is to create a space for the leading professionals working in the area of social justice and inclusion to share their expertise to support others to grow the social role at the sites, botanic gardens and other museums. We are honored to have Thiano Musuri, Senior Lecturer in Museum Studies at the Institute of Archaeology at UCL London. Thiano's background is in education and museum studies. She has worked for the Audience Research Unit of the Science Museum for many years, but also as a Senior Research Fellow at the Centre for Museums and Gallery Education at the Museum Studies Department of the University of Leicester. She was, of course, involved in developing the Generic Learning Outcomes Framework, influential for the museum sector, and ran her own consultancy business, Audience Focus, with a mission to help museums and heritage organizations to facilitate learning experiences for their visitors. Now, Fiona will talk to you about audience research and evaluation.
Okay, thank you, Samina, and hello, everyone. I know that you all come from different countries and different time zones, so good day. It's lovely to see all the messages on the right-hand side of my screen. I cannot see you, but I feel you out there. As Samina said, I'm going to talk about audience research and evaluation. Let me show you the slides. Before I give you an overview of what I'm going to cover today, I would like you to use the poll function, which it's the second one on the right-hand side. Respond to 2 quick questions related to your experience with evaluation in particular, if you've done any studies before. So I'm going to look at a couple of definitions, what audience research is and what evaluation is. They come from, they have been developed by professional bodies, and I'll give you the links to those. Then we'll talk about similarities and differences between research and evaluation. There's a lot of discussion around that, and I have my own way of approaching it. So that's what I'm going to talk to you about. There's a poll question there as well for you to fill in. And then I'm going to talk about 2 different approaches to evaluation. The first one is the most commonly used one, I guess, in museums, that looks at the whole kind of development process from the front-end evaluation, formative, to summative evaluation or development stage. Although this is the most commonly used one, it may not necessarily be the most appropriate one, especially when you work with communities or new and different audiences. And then I'm going to give you an example from a participatory, more participatory project that I've worked with, and just explain how that worked and the different methods that you can use. Then we'll focus more on methods and tools, giving specific examples from work that I have done in the past. And at the end, I'm going to give you some online links and resources or links to organizations, related organizations. Asimina is going to send you a Word document that has many more links like that, but I wanted to highlight some of them for you. So let me look at the poll. So quite a few of you have done evaluation before. A smaller number hasn't done evaluation. So going into some definitions now. So this definition of audience research comes from the Visitor Studies Association, and US-based professional body that looks at audience research both in terms of potential audiences, but also actual audiences. And these are types of research that different types of institutions get to do museums, botanical gardens, and other cultural organizations, using a variety of methods. And going on to what is evaluation, this definition comes from the American Evaluation Association. The reason why I like this particular one is because it doesn't only focus on programs or products like exhibitions, but also policies, personnel, and organizations. And the focus is on how you can assess both the strengths and weaknesses of those programs, policies, personnel, or products and organizations in order to improve their effectiveness. At this point, I would like you to take a very quick poll again and answer questions related to how you think, what are the differences between research and evaluation. To me, both research and evaluation start with a question, either a research question or an evaluation question. In both cases, you generate or you collect data in order to answer that question. You analyze the data, and then you present the results. And there are different outputs. So you can do papers, or blogs, or short internal technical reports. Another similarity is that very often they use the exact same methods to generate data, and the analysis could be done in a very similar way, whether you collect qualitative data or quantitative data. To me, the main difference between research, or else known as basic research, and evaluation, which is also known as applied research, is that with evaluation, you make a value judgment. So, for example, if we go back to the definition of evaluation, it very clearly says there that the aim is to assess strengths and weaknesses of these products or programs and so on. So you're very clearly asked to make a value judgment that will then lead to some kind of action. And I can see that going back to the previous poll about which kinds of methods you have used, people have used a variety of methods. Pressing on again, so often people make a huge kind of fuss really around research and evaluation, the things that one of them does, the other one doesn't do. But I think that especially with bigger projects, when you have a kind of series of evaluation studies, and especially when you can link up those evaluation studies and relate them to some kind of discussion out there in the museum world and place it in a wider context, then those evaluation studies are closer to research or basic research. So I think that the differences are not really as big as people make them to be, but it's definitely each evaluation study needs to make that value judgment, because either as an internal evaluator or as an external evaluator or consultant, that's what you're paid to do, to be useful to the team and help them make decisions about specific issues that are of interest to them. And while I'm talking about methods, and because this is one of the similarity I highlighted between basic research and evaluation, this is a table that has been created by my colleague Mariana Adams, who is an evaluator based in the US, just to give you an overview of some of the many methods that people use. And I think it's very nicely organized according to what visitors, what people do say, or the things they make or leave behind. So you can look at different types of data sets from the people's point of view. So for example, if you're interested in behavior, what people do. You can observe them, or you can track them around your space. If you're interested in the kind of meaning that people make or their understanding of particular programs or elements of a program or display, you need to talk to them. So the focus is on what people say. You can do interviews in different ways. You can talk to individuals, you can talk to groups, you can do telephone interviews, or nowadays Skype interviews. You can use personal meaning mapping or concept maps as a basis for an open-ended interview. And I'm going to show you some specific examples in a minute. And you can also collect what we call secondary data. So the things that people make as part of an activity that they're participating in, or things they leave behind. So perhaps you can ask them to create journals, or you can ask them to make a drawing. Very often, if you ask people to develop a concept map, they may include drawings as part of that. So all of that could be, for example, the basis for more for an interview, or they can be used in to support other methods that you use. What I would really encourage you to do is embed the evaluation in the activity that people do, wherever possible. You get better data. Usually it's more participatory, and people enjoy it more, rather than look at evaluation as something that is done after the event, after an activity, or after the visit to a particular display. So this is where I focus more on the two approaches to evaluation that I mentioned earlier. You can see them as, in a way, as the theory of evaluation. As I said before, the front-end formative summative cycle of evaluation seems to be the predominant one in museums and other cultural organizations. That is fine when you work with existing audiences, and also keeping in mind that this is a model testing approach, which means that as a museum or as an organization, you have an idea that you want to test, an idea of what type of exhibit you want to create and what content you wanted to include. And what you really do is accommodate visitors' agendas and include them in the process, but it's your model that it's tested, and the idea is to make improvements on provision that you're planning to develop. The other approach to evaluation, which is usually more appropriate when you work with non-visitors or new audiences, and especially community groups or minority groups that don't traditionally visit your organization, is the participant-oriented evaluation. This is more recent and it's used less frequently. But to my view, it is much more appropriate for the kind of work people need to do with new audiences or communities. One of the things that I would like to mention at this point is the impact of digital technology on evaluation. It has completely changed the way we can generate data, the type of data we can generate and deal with. And again, I'm going to give you examples of that and different studies I've done very soon. So moving on, I'm now going to offer some case studies and in relation to those approaches or models that I mentioned. So looking at the model testing approach, the front-end formative summative cycle, I have some examples from the Science Museum, especially the work I did a few years ago when I was working on the Welcome Wing, the National Maritime Museum, again here in London, and also the Victoria and Albert Museum. And then for the participatory kind of interpretation, design, and evaluation, I have an example that comes from the Science Off, which was a team that worked within the Science Museum in London. And I'm going to explain that again when we get to that example. So starting with the model testing, I'm sure a lot of you are very familiar with that figure. So you can start very early on during the development of an exhibition, a program, a website, a mobile app, and do front-end evaluation. Then during the development or more detailed development, you can do formative evaluation. And then at the end, when it's all ready and up and running, you can do summative evaluation. The LO stands for learning outcomes. So it could be the kind of outcome evaluation or impact evaluation, some people call it. And that is the equivalent of the summative evaluation. And it usually comes at the very end of the project. And it's more appropriate if you want to respond to a funder or internally within the museum and report what you've done, or report back to government or federal organizations. And now I'm going to take each one of those phases in turn. And again, many of you will be familiar with that. The reason why you do that, and that's why you do it so early on, is to test your own assumptions about visitors. So it happens during the concept development of a particular project, and you want to gain some understanding about how visitors respond of particular themes or the terminology that comes with a display or a program, the media of communication you plan to use. And you can use very many different methods. That the choice of the methods relates back to the specific questions that you have asked. And I hope that the figure I showed you earlier give you a sense of some of the methods that you could use. Let's look at one of the examples now. So this is a visual board that we used when we were developing the pattern pod exhibition at the Welcome Wing of the Science Museum. So the exhibition, the aim of the exhibition is to examine patterns in science and in nature, and how people who do research with those patterns go about it. So very early on, we wanted to find out what people, what sense people made of patterns in science and in nature. And we put together a series of images that include some of those patterns that you can find in nature. For example, you can see the sunflower there at the top, the starfish, and so on. And then you can also see some patterns in science. So when we first showed people the visual board, they actually didn't know how to respond to that. They could see different man-made things and natural things, but they couldn't go further than that. And that's when we introduced an introduction to the exhibition. And as soon as we told them that this is an exhibition about patterns, it was very easy for them to see the patterns, not just on the visual boards, but on their clothes, the environment of the museum around them. And it became very clear to us that actually the term pattern had to be in the title of the exhibition in order to, I guess, prepare people for what they were going to see, and not get into a space and be disappointed about its content. The next slide comes from, this is an object that was included in the Buddhist gallery of the Victoria and Albert Museum. So during the development process, I was asked to run a series of focus groups to examine how people who came from a Buddhist background and either came to the religion later. So there are many British Buddhists who came to the religion as adults, and many people who come from cultures where Buddhism is practiced, and they were immersed in that culture from a young age, but also people who don't have that as a background. It was a very complex series of studies, and I guess one of the most interesting findings for me and the exhibition team was the fact that British Buddhists have had a very intellectual approach to the religion because they learned about it through reading books and going to lectures and doing workshops rather than through osmosis. So there were very many different needs, especially in terms of interpretation, how you interpret Buddhism within the context of an exhibition to people who have completely different approaches and understandings of the same religion. Moving on to formative evaluation. So this is something that happens during the development. So at this stage, you have a very much more clear idea of what you want to what it is that you're developing, you want to maximize the functioning of exhibition elements or program elements. So you can create very inexpensive mock-ups or more kind of developed prototypes or storyboards. Perhaps you might want to test some draft text. And the idea here is that you want to find as many problems as you can and then take action to change them and correct them. And again, the methods you can use are different. I'm going to look at the methods in the second part of the presentation. This is from a study I did with the Maritime Museum. They wanted to test a new handheld resource. The museum wanted to eventually to create their own digital kind of or the handheld resource, but they thought that this was a big decision to make and maybe a very costly decision if they got it wrong. So they decided to sign with a provider, UCO. If you're interested, I can send you more information about that. So UCO is a company that provides the mobile phones and supports that. There's a platform that is supported, so everything that people do during their visit using the mobile phone is stored in a website, the UCL website, and then, for example, if you work with school groups, the teacher can take the group back to their school and do more work, follow-up work. So the museum was working with stage 6 and 7 pupils, so around between the age of 11 and 13, 14, I guess. And this was part of a bigger program. They wanted to offer this kind of digital interactivity in the gallery. And they were giving out mobile phones to pairs of school children. Now, when we did this study back in 2005-06, that was a new thing. Not many museums were offering that. So the element of it was very new and exciting. And although the mobile phone crashed many times, there were many different issues. all the pupils really rated the experience quite highly, because it was something that they didn't have before. Some of them had smartphones, and they kind of complained that the phones they were given by the museum were not as advanced as the phones they had. So, for example, that was a very useful finding for the museum, because one of the I guess decisions museums agonize over is whether you give people the device or allow them to use their own devices. And this was, definitely indicating that people, you cannot actually beat the devices that people bring with them, especially if they're teenagers. This is another example from an exhibition that was a temporary exhibition that was displayed at the Science Museum to start with. It was the science of aliens, so looking at research around not just aliens, but a lot of researchers do research in extreme environments on Earth, and from that they try to extrapolate what kind of life might be possible in other planets. So this piece of formative evaluation, we used printouts of a very complex interactive table, and I'm going to show you an example of that table, a picture of that in a minute. And this is a very easy way to very quickly test during the formative stage of evaluation, very complex interactive exhibitions or exhibits. Very quickly moving on to the summative evaluation. So it happens after the exhibition has opened, or the program is up and running, or the website is up and running, and you want to understand the impact that the whole of the exhibition has on visitor behavior, and also how they make meaning out of it. Again, various methods can be used. So this is what this interactive table I talked about a minute ago looks like. It was a huge installation, and this was some of the testing that we did at the when the exhibition was open to the public. That was in 2005, as you can see there. It was a very novel way of interacting, because at that point, visitors were used to touchscreen interactives, but with this one, the interaction movement had to be very smooth. You had to put your whole hand on the display in order to block the light that came from the projector that you can see at the top of the slide there. And people were not actually used to that at all. And it was a very expensive mistake to have made, because that meant that the team had to employ gallery staff, people who supported visitors during their interaction, and many of them modeled the kind of behavior that people had to adopt in order to make the interactive table work. So I hope that gives you a good overview of the front-end formative summative model testing approach, with some examples from projects I've worked on. And I was wondering at this stage if you have any questions.
Okay, since we don't have questions from other people, I would like to ask you one question, Tiano.
Okay.
Until we wait anybody else, could you tell us one example where your evaluation didn't work very well, maybe from the examples you just presented, or from other examples?
Yeah, I mean, the studies I've just presented, nothing kind of comes to mind immediately. Maybe that visual board I showed at the beginning, because originally we were not prepared for people not to be able to spot the patterns. So it was clear that it actually didn't work. The questionnaire, the list of questions we had was not working. And that's when we had to think about how we can change it and adapt it. And the idea came up that maybe we should actually give people some a brief description of the exhibition and what it might include. And that's when it actually worked really well. So, you know, sometimes you want to test something without giving people a lot of information in order to see what you get back. But in other cases, you may need to pace it in a different way. Start with giving people very little or minimal information, and then after they responded, then you can give them a bit more information, and then ask a few more questions. Usually have to say that the methods that don't seem to work is when I work with new audiences or people that don't normally visit museums. So I've worked with people who you know, have disabilities or family groups that are not among the kind of usual suspects, don't normally visit museums, and that's where you need to do quite a lot of adaptation, rethink sometimes the approaches.
That's great, thank you. And since we don't have any other questions, I'm going to follow up your last comment, because I had this discussion with another Botanic Garden professional about this issue, that her difficulty with evaluation is finding the right evaluation for hard-to-reach groups. So I don't know, maybe you can give us some examples of really successful methods you have used with particular target groups that you think it's good to share with the other participants.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that you need is a lot of time. And the reason I think you need to spend more time is that recruiting takes a lot more time. And my main advice would be to, I mean, it's really hard for people to escape their skin, but it's at least if you can not project your own values on other people, and that goes for research as well, the way you do research. So for example, we are working with the Science Museum on a project where we want to recruit and work with family groups that don't usually visit museums. And that took quite a lot of time to find out how to meet with them. And the easier way, of course, is going through the school or the teachers. But all of that takes time. And then you realize that there's a very complex ecosystem and environment within which people live. Some of them may have affiliations to religious organizations, so you may want to go through them. But I think that most of the time things don't work because you have completely different ideas in your head about what might or might not work. And you do tend to project your values on other people. But, you know, so most of the time it's trying to work around your values and try to forget how things work within your reality. I can see now, I'm not sure why I couldn't see the poll results from an earlier question about the differences and similarities between research and evaluation. And I can see that, you know, quite a few of you said that it's actually the purpose of the evaluation. And it's, yeah, I completely agree. They meet different purposes. And it goes back to that idea that you make a value judgment. That is the purpose of evaluation.
There is one question at the chat room. How do you recruit the test persons, especially for front-end evaluation from Germany?
So again, within this particular paradigm or model, because you're not working with the kind of underdog. You're working with visitors that a botanic garden or a museum or other organizations have, and usually you recruit them on the floor. So you just need to go out to the exhibition space, or if you run a program, to do it at the end of the program and try to recruit people from the who have a kind of profile close to the profile of the visitors that you want to develop for that particular exhibition or program that you're developing. So in that respect, it's very easy to recruit them. The usually recruiting issues come up when you work with new audiences. Okay, so I think that's a very good point to kind of move on to the next stage of the presentation. Let me take you back. I hope you can see the slides again. Okay, so there's another question here. Do you think it's okay to offer incentives for participants? I think that it depends. So when, for example, when you do focus groups or group discussions, yes, it is, I think it is okay and right to use incentives, because you ask people to give you quite a lot of their time, and the incentive in that case, I think people appreciate to be given money. It also depends, I think, across different countries, the practice is quite different as well. So, for example, in the UK, if you do if you use other types of methods, for example, one-to-one face-to-face interviews, I don't normally give people incentives. But if you completely change their agenda for the visit and you ask them to use quite a lot of their time to respond to your questions, I think you really have to give them some incentives. So the next slide comes from an example, a participatory evaluation. This was a program of evaluation that ran in parallel with a more traditional approach to evaluation, that front-end formative summative approach I showed you before. So the science of team was a kind of almost like a consultancy sitting within the Science Museum in London. The funding was different, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but what they wanted to do was to invite new types of family audiences that don't normally visit museums, but they spend free time together, usually going to the cinema or to theme parks. And we specifically targeted those kinds of visitors. I work with a recruiting company to recruit visitors who came to the museum to be engaged in a series of workshops. And this is also a good example of how you can incorporate evaluation methods into more programmatic elements. So for the families, it was a kind of fun couple of hours on a Sunday morning where they got engaged in developing material for a new kind of science of spying exhibition. That was the next exhibition after the science of aliens. So the way this worked was that we involved designers. So you can see the design, that the picture you have there. On the left side, you have a designer, then a family, a single mother and her son, a member from the museum development team, and also one of the evaluators. So we would meet, usually the team without the families, the team would meet the Wednesday before this audience family panel was going to take place. We would do the designers would debrief us what it is that they wanted to find out, the purpose of the activity or the part of the exhibition that they wanted to develop. Together, we would draft some evaluation questions that reflected those ideas and the purpose of the activity. Then the team of evaluators would go off, design the tools and the approach, and circulate it to everyone. The designers would also go off and develop particular props or mock-ups that we could use in the evaluation. And then we all came together on that Sunday. You can see, again, that picture is from a family panel where this particular group is developing an activity around. The idea was how spies can look at your garments to find out more about you. And how to protect your personal information. And the great thing about that is that the interpretive material, but also the textual interpretation that went with the activities were co-developed together with the family groups and also the designers. And the evaluator was there to facilitate the process. And the designers were usually absolutely convinced that this was an idea that came from them. So there was definitely a greater buying in. Then moving on to the next slide. So we would collect the data that was embedded in the activity that people did, and then meet on the Monday after the audience panel, discuss what data everybody collected. The evaluators would pull it all together, develop a report, and meet with the museum development team again to discuss the findings, but more importantly, to try to understand where the exhibition team was at and try to be on the same page with them. So that discussion was very important and was reflected in the conclusion and recommendation that we developed after all those series of meetings. Because very often, as external evaluators, you're asked to develop a report, but also write conclusions and recommendations that may be useful, but may not be useful. Things, as you know, when you develop programs or websites or exhibitions, things move very fast, especially during the later stage of development. So if you're not part of that team, you can very easily be out of date with the current thinking and main concerns that the team has. The other thing that we developed based on all of those activities and the material that the families developed as part of the audience panels was to create personas. So I'm not sure if everybody's familiar with personas, but it's something that it's used a lot in different industries where you create almost like an archetype of a visitor, but the material and the information for that person comes from real people. So there you have a fictional 8-year-old person called Emily, and then you kind of collate different activities and resources that many different 8-year-old girls developed as part of those audience panels that we put together. So interests they have, the things that they do in their free time, concept maps around spying and what they understand with the term spying, pictures of them doing kind of performance pieces around activities related to the theme of the exhibition. And that created a, so the personas were put in the kitchen area where the exhibition team would come together to eat or have coffee and informally discuss the development of the exhibition. And there were a kind of central piece and many discussions around those visitors. They had quite a lot of discussions around those visitors, and they were based, partly on assumptions, but to a large extent on actual real people and things that they were interested in or were doing in their free time, or they would like to do an exhibition about spying. Okay, so I'm now going to focus on methods I've used and also give you examples of particular tools. I know we're running a bit late, so I'm going to try to do it faster. The first example is a tracking tool. So this is a kind of observation tool, but it's more focused, I guess. So what you usually have is the floor plan of an exhibition and then some basic kind of demographic information about the person that you are following around a particular area or a whole exhibition. And of course, that information is based on appearance, how old you think they are, their gender, and so on. And you need to have information about the time that they spend, so dwell time in the space. So if you collect quite a lot of tracking sheets like that, you can see how people move around a particular space and areas that people use or don't use at all, the traffic, how the routes that people take through an exhibition, and so on. Moving on to the next one, I often I don't use one approach often, so triangulating using more than one methods I think is really important, and also if you can embed the methods in, again, the activity that people do. So this comes from a recent piece of research we did at the Natural History Museum, and I know that a colleague from the Natural History Museum is with us today. So we used those little cameras, the autographer cameras, that were very, very, very small. You could attach them on people's clothes, and they take pictures continuously, so you can recreate the itinerary. And that's a different kind of view from the tracking, again, observation. So you can see that we have a tracking map, like the one I showed you before. We used the autographer cameras that took pictures from different points of view. So each family member wore a different camera. And it's really interesting to see the vantage point of a child as compared to an adult. The picture above the autographer cameras show you a still image from video data that we collected. And then on the top left-hand side, you can see an image of a family that was interviewed at the end of the visit. So it's kind of quite method-heavy study, but that was the idea, to really test different types of methods and methodologies that we use in museums, and what kind of different types of data, different types of digital technology can provide, and what insights it can give you about the museum visit. Moving on to the next slide. I really like concept maps. They work very well with adults and they work well with children. Often children use drawings, and of course you really need to ask people what it is that they drew. The great thing about concept maps is that you can use them as a basis for a semi-structured interview. So an interview where you prompt people based on the concepts and words that they have put on their concept map. And what I particularly like about it is that you can use their own words and frames of references. And it goes back to the idea of, trying not to project your values and assume that people know the words that we use in museums, and we often forget to use jargon. It also works really well with younger children or older adults whose English is not their first language. So you can really, pitch the interview accordingly. So moving on to another example, this is, again, this works really well with children in particular, where you can ask them to make a drawing about the favorite exhibit, say, and then use that as the basis for an informal interview. So you do grab their attention as soon as you talk to them about something they care about, a drawing that they made about a favorite exhibit, and you can get really young children to talk about very complex ideas. So, for example, this little boy, the 7-year-old boy who had visited the experiment gallery in the Science Museum, the Science and Industry Museum in Manchester, he was able to explain his understanding of how you can use water to get that wheel around if you pump it, and then water moves up and can make electricity. So he didn't really have the words to say that, but with the drawing, the movements that he made, and some vocabulary that he had around that concept, it became very clear that he had a very complex understanding of the concept. He really knew how the exhibit worked. Okay, again, moving on. Oh, wait. Okay, so this is, I guess for this one, you really need to collaborate with a university, especially someone from computer science that can do the analytics. So this is a Google map of the London Zoo here in the UK, where we used mobile phones to track, and with GPS on them, to track people, the routes that they took around the zoo. And this kind of gives you, first of all, you can collect masses of data within a very short period of time, and you don't need many people to track the visitors around. So you give them the device, and the device tracks the data for you. So it's an example of, giving you a completely different insight into the dynamics of a museum visit, and with loads and lots of data to use with. I have a URL link at the end of this slide. You can use that to actually to watch a video of different families going around the zoo. It's a little animation that we have created. Okay, so and when you do or when someone else does the analytics for you, you can ask specific questions about the length of time that people, how long they stayed at particular exhibits, how long they stayed in the whole area, how much of their time they spend in exhibit kind of intense areas, as opposed to the cafe or the restaurant or other kind of areas where people socialize, like the playground, for example. Okay, so this kind of completes the presentation. I have 3 slides now just to highlight some of the resources. If you're interested in the Inspiring Learning for All project, where you can look at different ways of capturing learning outcomes or social outcomes, different types of outcomes, there's a link there. The VNA has all their evaluation online, and there are two URL links. Again, Asimina is going to send you a separate document, and a lot of that is going to be there. But just to highlight, if you need more examples, if you need to see evaluation reports, read the whole report, and also look at tools and methods that people have used. Usually they're included in the appendices of the reports. If you're based in Australia, there are resources there. Of course, you can access them online as well. And there's also Beverly Sorrell's book, Excellent Judging, that focuses on exhibitions in particular and how you can take a more visitor-focused approach to judging excellence in exhibition. You can find that online. And finally, there are three different professional groups related to audience research and visitor studies: the Visitor Studies Group in the UK, Visitor Studies Association in the US, but also the Special Committee on Audience Research and Evaluation, which is part of the American Alliance of Museums in the US. And that concludes my presentation. If you have any questions at this point, please use the chat function.
So you've mentioned quite a few examples that come from evaluation you conducted for other organizations. Can you give us some examples of how the organizations took forward the results of your evaluation? Because quite often I see that projects have been evaluated and the results of the evaluation are not really used into their practice.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, earlier in my career, I used to get very disappointed easily. But I think that you need to allow, it takes more time, first of all, for people to change approaches to evaluation. For example, and also I think it depends on what kind of approach you use. I'm really sad nowadays that everybody seems to go for outcome or impact evaluation. And in many ways that takes us backwards many, many years, because I mean, that's appropriate for kind of responding to a funder, but it's not very useful for you as a practitioner to change practice. So there are different kind of elements there. I think that it's a very slow process. It takes a while for people to see the value of evaluation in their practice and change their practice. And I think that especially with participatory evaluation, you have to really know the people that you work with and that they do want to change their practice in order to do that. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense. It takes a lot of time and effort to do participatory evaluation. And you really rely on people's time, and you recruit, different new participants and audiences to a museum. So unless you plan to make any changes, I think it's not ethical to collect the data in the first place. But I think that museum people do make changes when they're ready. But so, for example, the first time I collected automated data, the data I showed you, for example, with the study we did at the zoo, people were not ready for it. I did presentations for at least 3-4 years about it, and people were stunned. I mean, there were no questions at the end of the presentation because people didn't know what to do with it. So I think that we need to be more patient. That's in a nutshell, my response. Okay, let's go into Mark questions, how the autographer works. It's a camera, it's a little camera, very easy to use. You just, you open the lens, basically, you press a button and it takes a picture. I think there's a picture every second. You just attach it on people's clothes. There are different ways to do that, and it's very secure. And you don't need to do anything after that. It's actually the camera takes pictures automatically. So the autographer cameras, you cannot hire them. We bought it for this particular project. And actually, I went on the website the other day, and it seems that they're not creating cameras like that anymore. Well, it was like a pilot project. So they did those cameras. They got quite a lot of people to use them. They collected feedback, and now they're developing the next kind of stage of the project. So I guess they're going to come up with something much more complex and kind of to meet people's needs. But I can definitely send you more information about that. And they're tiny. They're much smaller than a mobile phone. Really, really small. So creative methods to be used with community groups, a question from Susan Bell. So this is a very kind of time and effort heavy approach. With community groups, I would suggest more ethnographic methods where you really spend time with the community. This is not a project I decided to include because it needs quite a lot of time, resources, and also specialized people who have done ethnographic studies before. Some of the organizations, the professional organizations, offer quite a lot of training. So if you're interested in that, you can also do more training. So we're working on the Building Bridges project with the Science Museum, as I said before, and the museum wants to see, to find out more about family groups that do not visit the museum, despite the fact that their children are part of the Building Bridges project through their school. So we're at the early stages of that. A colleague of mine, Naomi Haywood, is collecting the data. And, you just get reminded again that people have different values, different types of aspirations, and they express them in different ways. Museum researchers are often more used to kind of middle-class families and their values. We know how to recruit them, where to find them. It doesn't take as long. And they express things in a way we know how to analyze and what to do with that kind of data. So you just need to spend more time with people who are not like you, and really explore the network, the social network they're part of. So for example, one of the things we found was that word of mouth plays a big role in what schools they choose to send their kids to, and also churches play a big role, especially when the children go to a church school. Yeah, so again, kind of embedding evaluation methods in programs. I'm sure that the people who participate engage in quite a lot of activities. So I would suggest that you use the activities to think evaluatively. So you can, I'm not sure what kind of activities there are, but they may be making things, collage or drawings, or other kinds of kind of performances. So it's just a matter of collecting that information. So you can collect a drawing and ask a few of those people to tell you a bit about the drawing, or if it's a performance piece, you can video record it and then again ask a few of those people. We're not talking about huge numbers, 2 or 3 people every time you have the activity, I think would be enough to watch the performance and tell you a bit more about what they did, how the activity changed their ideas. I mean, it depends on what it is that you want to find out. There isn't just one question to be answered. So you have to work out what it is that you care about, and then develop questions around that, but use what people make as part of the activity as the basis to ask those questions. And people care more about the things that they've made as opposed to a list of questions that we develop for them. I mean, I have worked again with people with disabilities, and I mean, you need to spend a lot of time with them because it's you become the tool. It's not as important to develop a list of questions or things for them to do or to observe. You need to develop a relationship of trust, spend time with them, care about them and their lives. And it's amazing the kind of data you can generate just by chatting to people, really. And often simple questions about, how people spend their time together or separately, how they spend their weekdays, how they spend weekends, can give you quite a lot of information about them and their lives. And based on that, if you have the aim of the evaluation in mind all the time, and you create different themes that interest you, you can develop prompts that are based on what people say or do while you spend time with them. So I wouldn't worry so much about, having a list of questions before you start the evaluation. Usually the questions come very naturally. Okay, from Mark, a question about community groups, different ways to evaluate other than surveys and interviews as a group. I mean, usually videos are a good way because it's something that you can watch again and again. And as your ideas get more complex, you can, if you collect observation data, you have an idea in mind, and the data you collect reflect that idea. If you have a video, things happen and you can capture exactly what happened. So you can go back to it and ask different questions of the same video clips. I haven't talked about ethics of evaluation. A video involves quite a lot of ethical considerations, but once you have that in hand, I think that that's a very good method to use, or get people to develop diaries and share them with you if you have access to them beyond the museum or the botanic garden space. Bruno, measure learning as well as impact on well-being of participants that are behind suggestions or alternatives. Yeah, I mean, again, this is the focus is on well-being, but it's the idea is how to embed evaluation in the activities people do already. Some of the methods I think I showed you show that really well. So even concept maps you can incorporate in the actual activities that people do. We did a lot of concept maps as part of the audience panel for the Science Off series of exhibitions that we created. So it became a very, very popular type of activity to do. So the company that did the recruiting for us had a queue of people waiting to take part. It became really exciting for them because it was a lovely type of event to or time to spend with your family on a Sunday morning. And then we gave them access to the museum and different exhibitions, paying exhibitions. So it was quite a treat. So, it's finding out what interests people is, I guess, a great idea. Yes, so it is, all the methods I talked about are very qualitative. That's very true. And, maybe I should have made that clear at the beginning, that the vast majority of research I do is qualitative. I use quantitative methods as part of overall qualitative studies. So I don't only collect qualitative data. So, for example, going back to the London Zoo study, the data, the analytics data we collected when we gave people the mobile phones are all quantitative data and masses of quantitative data. And we then used other qualitative data to compare them with. The same was also the case with the data we collected at the Natural History Museum, where we used photographer cameras. So there was a combination of qualitative and quantitative data. But my interest is in qualitative methodologies, so kind of sitting above methods. The overall ethos of the research I do is qualitative. These are the kinds of questions I find most interesting.
Theano, you have just 1 more minute before we finish the presentation.
Okay. Just to thank everyone very much. Thank you for staying the full 1 hour and 20 minutes. I really enjoyed this. I haven't done this before, but it was really lovely. It did feel that there was an interaction. If you have more questions for me, please get in touch with Asimina. She will collate it all and I can answer them, and we can send all the questions and answers to all the participants. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Theano. That was a wonderful presentation explaining in the beginning the differences between research and evaluation. Theano provided us with real-life examples of different types of evaluation, from front-end to summative, with really inspiring projects such as the Science of Aliens or the Spy Maker. But also, we really touched upon quite a lot on community work evaluation, the difficulties you can encounter, but also the value of doing more qualitative research as opposed to collecting quantitative data. And I'm delighted to say that we have an audience with diverse background and experience, some really experienced evaluators and some people who are just the beginners. So I would like to finish with a quote from Joe Himlick, professor of Ohio State University and expert in informal science education evaluation. So he suggested that for the people who don't have the confidence of starting evaluation, any data you collect is better than no data. So just go out, try out any evaluation methods and just begin to improve your practice. And of course, Theano mentioned methods that can be used by more experienced researchers, but a lot of the methods presented could also be just trialed out by beginners. So thank you everybody for joining us today. Bye.